Hello, Amina. This is my feedback to your paragraph from last week, your evidence paragraph. First of all, I hope in today's small group tutorial, you were able to understand and get a little bit of clarification on what the task is. Judging by what you've done here, this is a very good start actually. But I would just encourage you to try and dig a little bit deeper, particularly into the representativeness. But I think what you have is a pretty solid beginning, and I think you understand all three terms. So let me just see what kind of feedback I can give you here. Of course, you did not have a model when you were writing this. So using the model will clarify things a little bit more. And there is another model coming next week of the passage, the video we were talking about in today's small group tutorial. So you should have at least two models to work with, and things will get better and better, hopefully. This time next week, things will be even clearer. Okay, so let's start. Now, the first supporting idea was basically about how there is systemic bias in internships, right? And the evidence, one evidence is the Oracle internship program, and you're saying that this is good evidence, sure, but we want to see whether it's sufficient, relevant, or representative, right? And then you're showing that it's a real existing internship. Okay, very good. And then you're saying that so first evidence is the Oracle internship program. That's basically an email. I think that's what you should say first of all. The evidence is an email, right? So first, in the identification paragraph, you have to identify the evidence. What is it? The evidence is basically an email which asks for particular groups of applicants from specific minorities. It specifically asks, I want this, and that. Hispanic, black, female, those minorities. We want those kinds of people. The speaker is using this evidence to prove that there is systemic bias in diversity programs in internships. Now what you can say here is it reliable? That email, you could say, not reliable. You're saying if it's reliable. We're not talking about reliability. We're talking about representative, relevant, and sufficient. Is it sufficient? That's the first question. So, is it sufficient? One email, is that sufficient to prove the very general point that there is systemic bias all across the United States in all kinds of internship programs? Is it sufficient to do that by just one email? Or even if it does include also websites, as you say later, which specifically target women, all of that evidence together, is that sufficient? And of course also the Twitter comments. All of this body of evidence put together, does that sufficiently prove that there is systemic bias? And the answer is no here. We need a much broader type of evidence with a broader scope, like a meta-analysis, a study, hopefully an academic study, some kind of a survey that surveys all kinds of internships all across the United States that proves that there is systemic bias. Just by a bunch of Twitter feeds, one isolated email, and some websites, the only thing that proves is that some internships target specific groups. But that doesn't prove his larger point, which is that there is systemic bias all across the United States, because he's saying diversity is garbage, everywhere there is reverse discrimination. So the answer is it's not sufficient, right? Now I like the evidence you've identified. This is all good. The Twitter feed, and you're saying, again, I cannot say that it's good evidence. We're not talking about good. We're talking about sufficient, relevant, reliable, right? Sorry, not reliable, representative. I got confused just reading this. So we need, just use the correct adjectives. We're not interested in whether it's reliable, whether it's all these things. Just stick with the three terms. And you're correct in saying that it's not sufficient. Now, but you do need to use the terminology, right? So let's take one example. Those Twitter feeds. We said that they're not sufficient. Is it representative, for instance? Well, Twitter feeds, how can they represent they can only comment. They cannot really be representative of what's going on. Plus, how many Twitter feeds are there? Right? He just gave a number of isolated Twitter feeds. So is that the typical reaction to an internship advertisement, those Twitter feeds? So can you judge from a number of Twitter feeds whether there is systemic bias in hiring for an internship? So clearly it's not relevant. Actually, that would be a very good example to think of why it's not relevant. And it's clearly not sufficient, and it's not representative either. Then you talk about the website and you say it's a good example because it is sufficient. Reliable, again, you say, because it is the official source, and can be representative because it shows the same science with the same aim. Now, I would agree that it's relevant. It is very relevant to show the Oracle email and the websites. So here I think this would be a good comment to say, to talk about relevance. It's relevant because he uses websites and he proves that really some internships do actually target specific minorities or women, specific underrepresented groups. Now, okay, that's fine, but is it entirely relevant? Again, what is he supporting? The supporting idea is that there is systemic bias. So you see, it's very important to start with a really clear supporting idea. Can you prove with a number of websites that there is systemic bias in internship hiring? Well, how about more websites? How about a study, a meta-analysis, a survey of thousands of websites, and then some concrete data? What's the percentage that specifically target minority groups? How many of these actually really are discriminatory? So all of this, you can comment on that and say it's not typical, it's not representative, it's not sufficient, and it's not completely relevant, right? So I would say stay focused on the three adjectives: relevant, sufficient, representative. And the more you practice those, the clearer it will get. The picture will become clearer. You'll understand what you need to say. I can see some kind of good comments here, but this in particular is very easily attacked, right? The websites maybe less so. The website seems more relevant, less representative, and less sufficient for sure. So now, after today's small group tutorial, I hope it became a little bit clearer what you need to do. We'll have another round of this. There is a model. Go back to the model and study it very carefully. I think things will get clearer. The model I gave for week 11. and there is another model coming up next week. Hopefully things will become even more clear. So I think you have a solid beginning here. Okay, good luck. If you have any questions, just let me know.